Today, should children be able to choose their pronouns? Who should get council houses? And where was Rishi Sunak last night? This is Politics Live. Joining me, Conservative MP Danny Kruger, Labour MP Barry Gardiner, pollster Frank Luntz and Liberal Democrat MP Layla Moran. On the programme today.
The ayes to the right, 354. The noes to the left, 7.
The report that branded Boris Johnson a liar is decisively backed by MPs after an impassioned debate.
I also say to members of my own party that it is doubly important for us to show that we are prepared to act when one of our own, however senior, is found wanting.
A 90-day sanction. Well, a vindictive sanction, it seems to me.
But we still don't know what Rishi Sunak thinks about it.
These boxes were interspersed with all sorts of things. Golf shirts, clothing, pants, shoes. There were many things.
God save the Queen, man.
Are either of these men fit to be president?
We have this sample came in earlier. This was one that we tested.
That was 5 years ago, but this year festival goers won't be able to get their drugs tested for safety. Should the government allow it? With more than 1 million on waiting lists, should more council housing be reserved for British citizens?
She is just how she is now. She's who she needs to be.
She, her, he, him, and they, them. Should children be allowed to choose what they're called at school? And as we come on air, the former Chancellor George Osborne is giving evidence at the COVID inquiry. There he is there. We're going to keep an eye on that throughout the programme. And if anything important develops, he says anything of note, we will bring it to you towards the end of the programme. You'll remember yesterday David Cameron, the former Prime Minister at the time, gave his evidence answering questions about whether austerity, the policies undertaken by both men, hampered the UK's efforts against the COVID pandemic. Let's return to events last night. You heard there in the headlines. It was a decisive vote in terms of MPs overwhelmingly backing the Privileges Committee report that found that Boris Johnson had lied, deliberately misled Parliament, to use the parliamentary speak, repeatedly. Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House for the government, was a rather lonely figure, actually, on the front bench. She said she would be supporting the committee's recommendations. There were some notable but a minority of voices against. The Prime Minister was one of those who stayed away. Was he right to do so, Danny?
I think so. I mean, I abstained as well, possibly for a different reason. I have less confidence in the process. I think the Prime Minister supported the process, but he felt as the leader of the party it was right not to try and influence what colleagues did. So he had other things to do, important meetings going on at number 10. So I think it's understandable and probably right that he didn't vote. Do
you think it was right that he stayed away, Barry?
Joe, it wasn't just the Prime Minister or Danny that stayed away. It was 285 members of Parliament. And we know why they did it. It wasn't because they felt it wasn't right to give a lead. Theresa May, I thought, was admirable. She gave a lead to Parliament. She said how important it was that people should have confidence in ministers at the dispatch box speaking the truth, because if they didn't, MPs wouldn't be able to hold the government to account. I thought she was superb. So she did give a lead. But the fact is that 285 members of Parliament, mostly Conservative, stayed away because they were afraid of their constituency chairman. They were afraid of what would happen to them in their constituencies, because I'm afraid to say Boris Johnson is still popular with a certain group of people who makes up the Conservative Party of today. And that's what they were afraid of. That's why they stayed away, not because they had other important business to do.
Well, I stayed away very deliberately, and I attended some of the debate. I didn't have confidence in the process. Barry's right. Boris himself remains very popular among some quarters. He's extremely unpopular among other quarters, including of our own party. So it goes either way. I felt that the process itself was flawed, but most fundamentally...
So when you say the process, which process?
Well, I think the members of the committee had clearly predetermined the outcome of their investigation.
Oh,
and were
really?
looking for evidence
Would you call it a kangaroo court as well?
I wouldn't be. I don't want to malign them too much. I think the process itself was very difficult. It essentially has a judicial role, and yet it doesn't follow the processes of a proper court.
But just to be clear for our viewers, it is a role that actually Parliament undertakes. They are asked by Parliament to undertake this process. They are already there doing that role. They are there to enforce whether or not contempt has happened.
Yes.
That's their role.
Indeed, it's a very, very difficult role to fulfil, and I recognise they did their best with it, but I didn't approve of the process, and I didn't approve of the suspension. But the most important thing, hold on a second, Barry, is that Boris himself has left Parliament now. So the opposition have their scalp. The committee has achieved its objective, which is to expel him. I think the best thing for the country and the party is that we all move on now, and I didn't want to give the proceedings yesterday more attention by supporting the division itself. So I think the best thing for us all to do now is to recognise the committee has had its way and we should move on.
I think that's really dangerous to suggest that the process itself is what needs questioning. I think actually there were some notable Conservative voices, Penny Mordaunt being one, who I think made a very eloquent case for why it was important to the country that Parliament, elected politicians, are able to hold each other to account. This is an important part of our democracy, and if we can't do it, and we've got that many, dozens and dozens and dozens of MPs suggesting that the process itself is flawed, that is undermining democracy itself. And I think that we've got to be very careful with what we're saying there. But in terms of Rishi Sunak, I think he was frit. He was very, very worried about how this is going to look. His position is weak, and I think it just proves how weak he is.
How do you think it looked?
I've been through this. This is the United States in 2020, 2021, when Donald Trump was brought up for the second time for impeachment. And the Republicans gave the same exact argument that you just gave. It's done. This process isn't fair. Let's not look backward. Let's look forward. I saw it, I've lived through it, and I will tell you that is a big mistake.
Frank, if I may...
What matters...
Well, let him finish.
What matters in all of this is accountability.
Sure.
In the end.
Absolutely.
And we have to hold our side, their side, everyone accountable. Boris Johnson had such an opportunity. He was given a mandate to make change. He behaved badly, which I think you'd agree. Whether or not the system is flawed, in the end, it's about accountability. And I was there in the chamber, and I saw the yelling going back and forth. On the sides that may not have been picked up by the microphones. Yes, it is stressful, and yes, it does make the Conservatives look badly. But embrace accountability.
I recognise that. I recognise that, and I thank you. And you're absolutely right. You can't just move on when there's been a clear wrongdoing. The problem, I repudiate the comparison with Trump, because actually what we're dealing with here is a report which attempts to do something which I don't think is possible, which is to look into the mind of Boris Johnson and to conclude that he knowingly and deliberately, absolutely with full intention, misled Parliament.
The evidence was quite compelling.
Well, I don't think it is.
That's
my challenge to the report. And Layla's point, actually, what's dangerous to our democracy is allowing Parliament to decide what somebody was thinking inside their own head. If there's evidence that he lied, that's one thing. He clearly did mislead Parliament, but the question is whether he did so knowingly and deliberately and with intention.
Briefly,
does not prove that point. And
brief comments.
Danny, if in fact you have serious concerns about the process, do you not think it was incumbent upon you yesterday to go into the chamber precisely to say why you felt the process was wrong, how it should be improved? That would actually be to contribute to the ability of Parliament to do its job properly. But you didn't do that. You failed to record a vote.
Well, I'm here now, and my point is that it's over now. Boris is going... And
on that point, it's over now, why are you so worried about that?
Because it was never over in the States. Donald Trump was defeated. He lost, correct?
Yeah.
There are 40% of Republicans who believe that he was duly elected president because we let the process, we wanted to move ahead. I've lived through this. There's a reason why I'm in the UK. I love this government. I love the people. I love this country. Don't make the same mistakes Americans
Boris
make.
is not Trump.
Well, all right.
No, Boris has written
and he's
more
not
books.
going to do what Trump did.
Boris has written more books than Donald Trump has read. So let's be clear about that. Still,
he is not challenging the legality of the process. nor am I. He's saying that the conclusion of the report was flawed.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Let's stick with Donald Trump, since you have raised it and perhaps made some comparison in terms of this process and what actually happened in Parliament last night. This headline, the Daily Telegraph: Donald Trump says he was too busy to return classified documents. You heard again in the headlines. Former president claims his personal belongings were mixed in with files and he hadn't had a chance to sort through them. This, of course, is the indictment alleging that Donald Trump has mishandled classified documents. You'll have seen the pictures of the boxes in his Mar-a-Lago home, obstructing justice and making false statements. But he is, at the moment, currently, the most likely person to win the Republican nomination. Is he going to?
At this point, you have to bet on him. He's getting more votes than all the other Republicans running combined. Showers are for taking. They're not for storing. And the fact that he denied again and again that he had these documents, the people who have analyzed this situation have said that it is so clear-cut that they believe that Trump will be fighting this indictment all throughout the election. He's been indicted for bad behavior in New York.
Sure, but will it change the fact that he can get the nomination?
This is why you have to hold people accountable, because if you don't, they get away with it and again and again. And whether it's an issue of indictments, it's still bad behavior. How do you have presidents and vice presidents and senators who have this private documentation and are showing it to other people, waving it around? It's not proper government.
Well, even if it beggars belief, will he win against Biden?
There's some things more important than elections, and that is the ethical carrying out of your job. It is the proper behavior. It's setting examples for your population, and in all of these, Donald Trump is found wanting. By the way,
but there's going to be a judgment. There's going to be a judgment, though, isn't there? There is going to be an election next year, and would he win against Biden?
It's 50-50. The numbers are 50-50 right now, and that's because they did not hold him accountable last year and the year before.
All right, well, let's have a look at this with Joe Biden.
I usually shake everybody's hand, but I'm going to stand in front of each section. No, I really mean it. And if you can see the camera, they can see you. And it's the least consequential part of this whole meeting for you, I promise. All right? God save the Queen, man.
Bizarre thing to watch, isn't it? Joe Biden saying "God save the Queen." Is he? I mean, he's most likely going to be the Democratic nomination. And is he fit to govern?
Joe Biden is so old, it takes him an hour and a half to watch 60 Minutes. He's so old, the only time he doesn't have to pee is when he's actually peeing.
I've got it.
He's so old, calls himself a constitutionalist. He wrote the document. He was in the room. It is a problem that if 337 million Americans, we have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, what is happening in America?
76% of the population wants somebody different. I'm going to give you a name for viewers to watch. Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, conservative Democrat.
Yeah.
I believe that this is the year for a third party.
As you sit here now, though, it does look like it will be Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. We've presented a sort of a character form, if you like, with those two clips of both men. People will ask, how can that be in the richest nation on earth?
It's why I look at this and I'm looking for a place to rent. I want to stay.
I was going to say, we've done mortgages. Oh, you're to rent. Fair enough, but even rents are sky high. I don't think it's affordable at the moment.
For what the BBC pays me to be here, I will be homeless.
Well, that's a different subject altogether. Let's have a look at a clip from a film we ran back actually on the very first programme of Politics Live in 2018 about testing drugs for safety at festivals.
The service user will come in, they put a small amount of a sample in a bag. So we have this sample came in earlier. This was one that we tested. It ended up being plaster of Paris. And the service user has received that result back.
What did they think it was?
They believed it was MDMA or an ecstasy tablet.
Wednesday the 7th of August 2013.
gave her a hug before she left, because I always do that with my daughters, just in case I never see you again. How could I know that this time that was real? I don't think she had any idea really what she was doing. The ketamine was very pure, and although it's not usual that Eleanor died after such a relatively low amount, the fact is it's a cocktail, it's a Russian roulette, it's a risk, it's a gamble.
And that obviously ending with the mother who believes her daughter would be alive had testing the drugs that she took, if it had been available at the time. Now, festival organisers are saying that they can't operate because they need a licence, which takes up to 3 months to be granted, making it impossible to test potentially lethal drugs, risking the safety of people who go to festivals this summer. Do you actually back the Home Office's calls to make it more difficult and actually prevent testing drugs safely?
I'm not sure that's what they're doing. There does seem to be a problem, as I understand it, this year with getting these licences. I mean, if your question is, should the government be, as it were, endorsing drug testing, I think it's a difficult one, because there's a reason these drugs are illegal. They're dangerous even if they have been tested and they haven't been adulterated in some way. And I think it's dangerous for us as a society to be tacitly endorsing druggies. That said, I think at these festivals or in clubs where there are third parties, charities or whatever, who are prepared to test people's drugs, then perhaps that's acceptable. The important thing is that whole process is properly regulated, and crucially that we do make every effort we can to stop drugs coming into these sites in the first place.
Leila?
We need a public health approach to all of this. It seems bizarre that whilst festivals in the past could test and festivals in the future can, the Home Office can't find a way to issue these licences in time for the festivals this summer. And that mother that you were playing earlier, her voice really resonated. I have a constituent whose daughter died because what she said to her is, don't do drugs, but if you have to, be safe and make sure that it's as pure as it can be. The girl took ecstasy and had an overdose because she did source the purest possible drug she could find and ended up taking far too much because the information wasn't there. So, you know, are we going to pretend that young people aren't going to go to festivals and do drugs? Guys, get real. They are. Can we try and make them a bit safer? Absolutely, we should. And I really hope the Home Office isn't dogmatic about this. You know, let's get these drug testing facilities in there as quickly as possible so that we can save lives. They do save lives. They've proven to save lives. I don't understand why the Home Office has done this now. If they did it at Christmas time, they could have solved it by now. I don't understand why now.
Barry?
That's absolutely right. Look, the Home Office is licensing drug testing, so it's not against drug testing. What they should have done is, knowing that the season was coming up, Glastonbury is just about to start, what they should have done is 6 months ago they should have said, by the way guys, this year we're going to introduce a licensing regime. We recognise that, you know, we don't want anybody doing drugs, we're against drugs, all the rest of it, but we do license the regime, and if you want to get a license so you can have safety, public health at your festival, make sure you get your license. Everybody would have got the license and young people would have been safe. It's simply a failure of governance. And Leila's right. It should now be very easy for the Home Office to say, what we will do is we will rush through some emergency licenses before Glastonbury starts, before the other festivals come on, and take it from
The other thing they do, by the way, is they take confiscated drugs and they test them too. So, you know, they see people with, it says very clearly when you go to a festival, do not bring illicit drugs to this festival. They find them in the bags, they then confiscate them, they go get tested on site immediately. And there have been cases where they found very, very, very dangerous versions of these drugs. They then put out a push notification to everybody in the festival to say, beware, if you take this, you're highly likely to come to harm. I mean, why would you not want that? This is just common sense.
I mean, it's difficult to know what's in the mind of the Home Office, referring to another discussion, but it is true they're going to need a new licence to operate UK festivals this year, and it's going to take some time. Something that Danny said, do you think there is any sort of combination of feeling uncomfortable about looking as if you're giving tacit support in any way to bringing drugs to festivals if there is an ability to test it, the safety of it?
We would not do this in the States. This debate is so foreign to me because the suggestion that it's the government's responsibility to make sure the drugs that are taken are safe. No, it's the parents' responsibility to teach the kids what to do and what not to do. We keep shifting everything over to government. in America, this debate would not be happening.
Government has seized this. This is not us shifting it to government. Government has come in here and said, we are going to demand that there be a licensing regime. Let's be clear. So government has taken this on themselves, but they've made a mistake in not giving a long enough warning period to the festival organisers. That's the problem.
Just to be clear, Frank, this isn't the government setting up testing sites. These are third parties, charities very often. And what the government is saying is a licensing for these third party sites. Yeah. So I think that is, and what the parents are saying, I think the kids are trying to do, you know, if you're going to do this, try and be safe.
There is a challenge generally about drug policy, that policies that are a harm reduction approach, as you say, often does actually lead to people feeling that the government is enabling them and supporting them to take drugs. And we've seen that with heroin. So actually a much more robust crime prevention strategy is often safer for people. If we simply say, we will make sure that you can, you know, inject yourself safely, or we'll test your pills, you're actually saying, go ahead and take drugs safely. And that's ultimately more dangerous for people. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing...
Just done, isn't it, Danny? Because there is a we will license it.
But we need to recognise that the main effort needs to be on prevention and prohibition of drugs, rather than saying that everybody can do it as long as it's safe.
So we did this in San Francisco, and all you have to do is look at San Francisco. The city's destroyed. Nobody wants to live there. It's unsafe for every human being. It's disgusting.
Is that a broader point about drug policy? Festivals are something quite specific, where a lot of young people are going to be at a time. But I take your broader point about society. The Liberal Democrats have had traditionally a more liberal approach, for instance, on the legalisation of cannabis.
Right,
is that something that you would like to see more broadly?
But on that, I mean, it's a public health approach. It's not saying we endorse this as a lifestyle. What it's saying is we agree this is harmful. We need to take the money out of the hands of the gangs and put it in the hands of public health experts who can then disseminate it. When we've done calculations on this, we think that our policy would raise £1 billion, which we would then
legalisation,
which we would then be able to plough into public health to get that reduced. In the same way that, you know, tobacco is illegal, and yet with public health policies, less and less people use it, and more people know it's harmful. So, you know, to pretend like it doesn't exist, I don't agree that the prohibition approach works.
Well, it's a question of where you draw the line. So I'm actually much more sympathetic than most of my Conservative colleagues to the case for legalisation of cannabis, and I've seen this in Canada, their approach there. So I think there might well be a case, as you say, for licensing that drug, although I think we have to be very, very careful. Very careful about you create a black market. If you set the bar too high, it doesn't work. But the case for harder drugs, I really don't think is there. And as Frank says, in the US, where they have this, you know, very liberal harm reduction approach, it's devastating to communities and to poor people most of all.
We'll move on. The headline in the Times: Britain's to be priority on council house lists. Ministers look at tightening rules for migrants. We understand that this story is referring to plans that could be drawn up for a bill in the King's Speech later this year, and it would mean that Britons get priority. A good idea, Danny?
I think so, very much. And I think the public would expect that to be the case anyway. And one of the great objections that people have to the loss of control of our borders that we've seen in recent years is because the result of people arriving here is that they very quickly make use of public support. I think that we need immigrants. We need immigration for lots of reasons. I think it's way too high. But every person who's awarded a visa to come here should be doing so because they're going to be making a contribution to our country. And if the first thing they do is get a council house, clearly they're not making a sufficient contribution, and they're taking a home from a British citizen who needs it. So I absolutely think we have to create rules that attaches the allocation of council housing to the length of time that you've been in the community, and that's something that...
Right, well, that does exist. I think you have to be here for 2 years. I think that is in the guidance. But are you saying that the UK government or councils should prioritise all British citizens over foreign nationals, regardless of need?
No, I think they need to have some discretion. But I do think it's appropriate to have clarity from above, and they should have the opportunity to prioritise British citizens and a clear encouragement to do so. I don't think it's right that people should be able to come in and make immediate, very expensive use of British taxpayers' resources, public services and council housing. We do absolutely need some people coming into this country, but they should be self-supporting.
Barry?
Well, we just established that they can't do that immediately. But I think the con here, Joe, is that the government has resiled from its 300,000 a year house building targets. They've done so under pressure from their backbench MPs, and last year there were 1.2 million people needing accommodation, and only 800,000 were able to get it. So you can't give to a British citizen a house that you haven't built because you failed to meet your house building targets. That's the first point.
Right.
Now to go on.
Yes.
Now to go on. It seems to me that I've long argued that the time that you're on the waiting list should also accrue points on the points register. So if you're going to base it on housing need, which is what you do, so if somebody is in overcrowded accommodation or if they've got health issues, which means they can't go on the fourth floor,
or whatever, two families.
Then what you do...
One family is foreign-born and one is a British-born family, and they have very similar needs in the way that you were describing. The issue here is, should the British-born be given priority or not?
I don't think they're not saying British-born, are they?
Well, Britons.
Plenty of British
people
are not British-born.
But Britain's born. Yes, if you've got legal right, indefinite right to remain.
That's
but if you were to
compare,
the two, should Britons be given priority?
No, look, if the government has said you are here as an equal citizen, right? You have indefinite leave to remain in this country. You're here as an equal citizen. You have the rights of a citizen in this country. Then you have to then consider on need. My point is that the time you've been waiting on the waiting list should contribute to that points basis of need. Because if you've been waiting 10 years and somebody comes along who's actually not been waiting 10 years and you have the same health need or the same overcrowding need, the person who's been waiting longer should get the home first. But the fundamental point is the government is not building enough homes, and it's not doing that because it's been pressurised by its own backbenchers to drop its housing targets.
Danny?
Well, we do need more housing, that certainly is the case. We don't necessarily need them delivered through these top-down targets, and actually my local authority in Wiltshire is building more houses than its target, but it doesn't want to be responsible for a top-down system. So I think we do need a bottom-up house-building strategy, which we can deliver, but mostly we need to reduce demand. I mean, Barry's absolutely right. We have a crisis of housing because there are too many people looking for too few homes. We need to increase the number of homes, but we need to reduce demand as well, and partly that's by reducing immigration. 4/5 of population growth in this century is driven by immigration. That is a fundamental challenge to our housing supply system as well as to public services. So fundamentally we need to reduce the number of people coming into this country to relieve pressure on our housing.
I mean, foreigners with visas giving them indefinite leave to stay in Britain are eligible for council housing, alongside refugees and those on schemes such as Homes for Ukraine. Should anything change in the way council homes are allocated to people?
I think this is a complete red herring. Right. I mean, as you've pointed out, actually, we first thought, you know, is it people with British passports, or is it which type of visa? Actually, it's permanent residents and British passport holders, and you've paid into the system. You are
for at least 2 years.
You are not allowed recourse to public funds if you are a migrant, a recently arrived migrant or an asylum seeker. And so this is a complete red herring. The system as it is already prioritises need. And by all means, let's do tweaks. Yep. But actually what this is a way of distracting from government failure. Okay?
That's the point.
So there's two things that they haven't done. And I would agree with house building, but specifically houses for social rent in particular and social housing. So I think we need targets for that. But I also agree with Danny, the way to do this is bottom up. If you look at local plans and where you've got strong accountability in local councils with a good relationship with the community, where they feel that it's a community first approach, you actually build more houses. And so it's a win-win. The community feels part of it and you build more houses that are more affordable. The government are meanwhile planning, I believe, to introduce a bill that would completely derail that link completely. Well, and that is hugely unpopular, and rightly so.
That's not the case. No, we're reinforcing the principle of local plans. I absolutely agree with Leila there. And what this government recognises, and we brought in the Localism Act, we created the whole local plan system. Developers game that system, so it needs to be strengthened. But what the government absolutely is committed to is local communities setting their own strategy. We need to get away from the idea that everything can be done from the centre. Local communities do want to grow. They need to grow in order to remain viable places, but we need to give them the incentives and the discretion to do it in their own way.
Yeah. It may be a distraction, as Leila has said, and Barry agrees, in terms of headlines like this on stories in terms of allocating council homes, but could it be an election winner?
Absolutely. And I'm listening very carefully to what both of you say. You're going to be held accountable for not building enough homes, and the voters are afraid that you're going to give benefits to people who vote Labour, who may not be justified.
Sorry, who vote Labour?
who would vote Labour. Who
Why?
would vote Labour.
Why? What evidence do you have
I've got
that suggests...
years and years of polling that suggests that Labour has a specific segment of the population that it seeks to appeal to.
And you're accusing my party...
I'm not accusing
No, sorry, you just did.
You jumped
said...
into it.
Well, let him finish. Let him finish, and then I will let you come back, Barry.
That this is a major issue. This is significant. It's going to be a voter issue. You're correct to raise this. And the question is going to be, who deserves the housing? Who do you prioritize? There's one house. There are two families. I love the way that you put it. Who are you going to give priority to? And voters are going to make a decision based on how you answer that question.
And my answer to that question was to the person who has been longest on the waiting list. And that's a fair answer. You suggested that I was going to prioritise, or my party was going to prioritise, people on the basis of how they vote. That is entirely wrong.
That is the expectation. That is the perception, which is why you lost in 2015, why you lost in 2017, and why you lost in 2019. You have the advantage. You are in a much stronger position than he is.
This is absolutely...
It's not absolutely. Why'd you lose in 2015? Why'd you lose in 2017? Why were you just trashed in 2019? Because voters didn't trust Labour. Guess what? You've changed that perception. You're in the lead. You should win this election. The only way that you lose it is by benefiting people that the public says isn't fair.
Well,
you're winning. You're winning, so don't damn me. I'm saying you're winning, and I'm talking about why you lost.
Sorry, I'm not damning you. What I'm saying is I'm not prepared to accept advice on how Labour should conduct its electoral strategy from a right-wing American Republican.
Okay, I'm not a right-wing, and I'm not Republican, so get your information correct. And secondly, all I do is I read the numbers, I ask voters, I do interviews. I've been doing this now for the last 25 years. You could have won in 2017.
Yeah.
You could have won in 2015. You didn't.
Yeah.
Do you think you understand voters better now than perhaps you did in those previous elections?
You mean as a party? I'm not sure that it's a matter of our understanding of voters. I think it's a matter of giving a vision to voters that they believe is going to improve their lives. And I think that's what is incumbent on us to do as a party, to give them the confidence that we have sight of a future that they can believe in, that they can see gives them hope for their own families, and that they have confidence that we will deliver and that we will actually do what we say when we get into government.
All right, well,
I agree with that, and I apologize because I shouldn't have jumped so hard. I felt you were accusing me. What you just said is absolutely correct, and it's the reason why you're winning right now. And if you stay that way, you'll be the next governor.
Surely they're winning because we've been doing so badly. I think the public are completely confused about what the Labour Party stand for. I mean,
well, I know you feel you have to jump in at this point, but yes, finish your sentence.
Just quickly, because I think it is a great mystery what the offer that the Labour Party are going to give to the country is. And at the moment, they're doing so well in the polls because we've been, embarrassing in the last year or so. The public is still the jury is out. There's still a large number of people waiting to make their mind up, and I think they're going to be waiting a long time to understand what the Labour Party stands for. We have a plan that's actually going to deliver.
All right, I suppose I've got to let all the parties here have their say.
Anything will do.
All right, let's talk about this. In the Times, ban children changing pronouns at school, Tory MP Miriam Cates says. Now, this is about whether schools should allow children to change their pronouns to be referred to as he and him rather than she and her, or vice versa. The Conservative MP there has said that schools should block children from changing their pronouns even if a child has parental consent to do so. Now, the government is about to publish guidance on how schools in England should respond to these situations. And according to the Times, the government guidance will say teachers should allow children to change their preferred pronouns with parental consent. Are you in favour of that, Danny?
Let's see what the government guidance is. I start with the same position that Miriam is in, which is I think we have a real problem in our schools, and I'm sure we've all come across it, which is a large number of young people very confused and opting to identify as the opposite sex. It confuses the schools, and it leads to all sorts of distress. I think we need to be much clearer as a society and as a country, and therefore the government needs to act to say, by all means, if parents want to support their children's gender ID at home, that's fine, but schools need to treat people as either boys or girls, and it's too confusing if they're allowed to self-identify.
Layla?
I was a teacher for far longer than I've been an MP, and was a pastoral head of year, so dealt with this and all sorts of issues. I took my role as a teacher as being I needed to create a space, a school, where children feel that they can be themselves, be happy, feel safe, so that they can learn, because fundamentally that's what they're in school to do. I taught a trans child, and for the first term didn't even realise, because they had changed their pronouns, were living as, in this case, a boy, and the parents had full knowledge, and it was just how it was, and they went on to do fabulously well. I don't think it's for a school to determine someone's gender. I don't think it's for a school to ban or not. And young people are going through a lot. You know, to suggest that this is easy for them, it's not. It's not easy for their parents either. It's not easy for the school. This is really, really sensitive stuff. And so like you, I will wait for the guidance. I want to see the detail, because I think the devil is in this detail. But I would put it to everybody that, you know, the people, if you're acting in the best interests of the child, and I believe that all the schools, teachers, parents, everyone is, let them be able to help each other with what the right path is. I don't feel that this is an area that government should be interfering. I think it's really interesting.
Even if schools are calling out for guidance, which they may or may not be.
They want guidance, but banning is strong. Guidance is different.
Leila, what if the parents support their child's desire to have treatment, irreversible medical treatment, to transition and to change sex? Do you think that's something...
Again, this is what we're talking about schools right now.
Well, yes, but your point is that children should be allowed to be who they are, or be who they want to be, and if parents support it, then it's not for you said it's not for government to intervene, but government does all the time.
No, but I'm talking about schools, Danny. I was saying, I said that in the context of, as a teacher, what I want is for them to be able to be as authentically themselves as they possibly can be, because that means they are going to be not worrying about that in my classroom while I'm trying to teach them Newton's laws. They're going to be actually listening to me while I'm trying to teach them the lesson.
And if the parent
it's
doesn't
in the context of schools.
Or if the parent doesn't know, or the parent doesn't agree, should the school then make a decision to affirm the child's decision, or should it refer to the parent?
Well, this is where the guidance, I think I'm waiting to see what it says. I think it's very, very difficult for any of us around this table to postulate what these very, very sensitive conversations will sound or feel like on the ground. Guidance needs to give room for the people who genuinely love that child to help them through this. And I'm sorry, but I don't believe that Miriam Cates or the government are doing what they're doing with love for the child. I just don't. I think they're taking...
Offensive. Miriam was a teacher as well. She was a biology teacher. She spent as long as you in the classroom, and I think it's not totally inappropriate to suggest that she's not doing this in good faith.
Well, let me just put what else, as you say, you know her well, Miriam. She says few parents will say no because children have been groomed to threaten suicide, and few children will refuse to use preferred pronouns if adults are complicit in the transition. This is a psychological intervention with unknown consequences. Schools do not have the authority to make this intervention, even with parental consent. Do you agree with that?
I do, and I'm afraid there are cases like that. I mean, Leila's absolutely right. This is extremely sensitive, and there's a great range of different people in different circumstances, but we do hear these distressing, very, very serious situations. I'm afraid, I mean, what I'm hearing from Leila, and I totally respect you're going to wait for the guidance as we are, but it sounds like you don't think there should be very firm guidance because you think we should be trusting parents and schools, which I understand, and in principle, that's where I come from in education as well. But the great difficulty is, in this case, you will be authorising we essentially be authorising the children to decide what they want because they can persuade their parents what they want. They can, and the school has to fall in behind it. And really, in this instance, more than perhaps any other we can think of, we have to make children be children. We have to say, I'm so sorry. You are not in charge of what sex you are at this stage. By all means, at home, you can do what you want. But as a school, which is a government-regulated body, we have to be very, very clear on, for their sake and for the sake of everybody else,
but all that's going to happen, Danny, if you do this, all that's going to happen is that they're going to get an uptick in homeschooling. And in fact, I had a parent of a trans child contact me when this was first mooted, saying, as it happens, their child was in a school that was able to navigate this with them, again, very supportive, and they were very grateful for that. If that hadn't existed, they probably would have taken the child out of school. And fundamentally, what we want here is to create a society that is free and open and fair, allows individuals to express who they are, and to be able to have a society where they feel confident and be able to contribute. We all want the same thing.
Well, it is very difficult to navigate, that's clear. I just want to draw your attention, Barry, to this story related to it directly in The Sun. Gender row, fury at teacher who called pupil despicable for questioning classmates' claim she should, or could, I should say, identify as a cat. Now, it's an audio recording of a teacher talking to a pupil about gender identity, and they're rowing. I mean, the pupil was arguing that there are only two genders and that the teacher described that as despicable and suggested the pupil should go to a different school. What's your reaction to that?
Look, I haven't heard it, but my point would be this. I've always considered that whoever you are, however much I disagree with you, I try and call you by your name, the name that you want to be called by, because I think that's just basic respect between human beings. There's often people who I disagree with. I can think of other names for them, but I don't call them.
Don't say them on this programme.
I don't call them that because I think it's important that we engage with each other respectfully. In school,
yes,
it should be a respectful environment. It should be an environment
no one would agree with that. But if you had to do the guidance, Barry, what would you say? Would you say that teachers should allow children to decide how they should be called?
Sorry, Danny, you've had quite a long session on this. My view would be that if the parents, and my understanding of what the government is proposing in the guidance, is that if parents support the child in wanting to be called by the opposite pronoun, or by they and them, if the parent supports that, then the school should back the parent. It's not been suggested, as far as I'm aware, that the child, against the parent's wishes, should have their decision endorsed.
No, that's
and that I would not be in favour of. And that I would not be in favour of. But I think it is important. Schools do need guidance, and the government, the Department for Education, should try and help them in what can be a very, very difficult pastoral situation.
And we'll see what the guidance is. I mean, how important is this as an issue to voters?
It does matter, but it matters on the extreme. You spent 7.5 minutes discussing this. You did not discuss the students' ability to read. You did not discuss mathematics. You did not discuss history. You did not discuss any of the computers and technology, innovation. None of the actual core topics that need to be addressed, because in both our countries, our students are not learning what they need to know to be successful at university, career, and life. So my fear about this whole conversation is that you've sidetracked education for that 1 or 2% rather than the other 98% who are being ignored, forgotten, or left behind because schools aren't working.
We said we would keep an eye on the evidence from the former Chancellor, George Osborne, because he has been giving evidence to the COVID inquiry in London. The counsel to the inquiry, Kate Blackwell-Casey, asked him if austerity had contributed to the severity of the pandemic, depleting the UK's health and social care capacity and increasing inequality. Let's have a listen.
It's not surprising that the biggest economic crash that Britain experienced since the 1930s has an impact on Britain, and on poverty, and on unemployment, and on people's life chances. That's unfortunately what happens when your country experiences such a massive economic shock as we experienced in 2008-9. What flows from that is a whole set of things, and one of them is seriously impaired public finances, which you then have to repair, and that is what we set about doing. I would say if we had not done that, Britain would have been more exposed, not just to future things like the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, that was George Osborne, the former Chancellor, giving evidence at the COVID inquiry. And, of course, those hearings are continuing all week. We heard yesterday from David Cameron, the former Prime Minister. Do you think that lessons will be learnt, Frank? Just watching this, obviously, the world suffered from the pandemic. Just very briefly, do you think we'll learn lessons from an inquiry like this?
Yes, because it's promoting accountability. And the fact is democracies die in darkness. And without accountability, you can't fix things, you can't make them better.
That's all we have time for. Thank you to all of my guests today. I will be back tomorrow, of course, with more Politics Live, and we'll have Prime Minister's Questions at 11:15 here on BBC Two and the BBC iPlayer. But from all of us here, goodbye. Have a lovely afternoon.